I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
After weeks of chaos and turmoil, Liz Truss calls it a day. She becomes the shortest-serving Prime Minister in British history. Just 6 weeks after her appointment by Her Majesty the Queen, Liz Truss becomes a victim of her own failure to command confidence at Westminster and beyond. Tonight, the talk at Westminster is of potential successors and whether the Conservatives can find a person capable of repairing the damage.
2022, the year of 3 Prime Ministers at least. After an astonishing decade in British politics, another unprecedented moment.
As the news came in, we asked voters for their impressions of the latest events at Westminster.
It just needs stabilising, needs sorting out and moving forward.
I wouldn't vote Conservative now, no.
Why not?
Because I don't feel we can trust them.
The likely candidates include some very familiar faces, but Labour says yet another change of Prime Minister should trigger a general election.
The public are entitled to have their say, and that's why there should be a general election.
We'll have all the news and analysis of the Prime Minister's resignation. Also on this extended edition of BBC News at 10. People who work with children and don't report allegations of sexual abuse should be prosecuted, according to the long-awaited findings of an independent inquiry. And 3 years after the death of a teenage motorcyclist in Northamptonshire, a US citizen pleads guilty to causing his death by careless driving.
On BBC London, reaction from the borough where Liz Truss started in politics. We'll be live tonight in Greenwich and we'll be finding out what the political turmoil means for Londoners.
Good evening. After 6 weeks of chaos and upheaval, Liz Truss has resigned as Conservative leader, ensuring a place in the record books as the shortest-serving Prime Minister in British history. The breaking point for many Conservative MPs came yesterday, with the sudden resignation of the Home Secretary and then the shambolic arrangements for a key vote in the House of Commons. Liz Truss had struggled to impose her authority since the tax-cutting mini-budget, most of which has now been abandoned. There will now be an accelerated leadership election. It's meant to be completed by a week tomorrow, and the aim is clearly to limit the number of candidates. Any MP wishing to stand will need to get 100 of their fellow Conservative MPs to nominate them. We start tonight with our political editor Chris Mason in Downing Street.
Liz Truss as Prime Minister, the steepest, shortest and fastest roller coaster in British political history. She triumphed, reaching the very top of British politics, but crashes out faster than any of her predecessors in British history. And she bequeaths a party and a country in chaos. There is no more important moment in British politics when you can't answer the question, who will be our Prime Minister in a fortnight? Tonight, we have one of those moments, yet again. Lunchtime in Downing Street and the lectern is back. 6 weeks and 2 days since Liz Truss stood behind it as she became Prime Minister, she was back too. This time, to resign.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
So what on earth happens now?
This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
What an extraordinary moment. Just 3.5 months since Boris Johnson stood at that lectern and resigned himself. Now his successor has done just the same. The chaos deepens. Enter then this man, Sir Graham Brady, who the Prime Minister mentioned, who will oversee the race to replace Liz Truss. What's he got to say?
Good afternoon, everybody. There's not a great deal that I can say at the moment. I have spoken to the party chairman, Jake Berry, and he has confirmed that it will be possible to conduct a ballot and conclude a leadership election by Friday the 28th of October.
Do you accept that this is a complete dog's dinner?
It's certainly not a circumstance that I would wish to see.
So what do the other parties make of it? The Conservatives' rivals say it's time for a general election. Call blimey, another opponent for you to face. What do you make of it?
Well, it is another opponent, and, you know, we're burning through prime ministers, we're burning through chancellors, we're burning through home secretaries, and that gives it an element of soap opera. But it isn't just a soap opera, and this is, you know, for many people who are facing higher prices, higher mortgages, this is real damage that's being inflicted on them. I really don't think that another revolving door of chaos, another experiment at the top of the Tory party is the way out of this.
What needs to happen now? Well, on a UK level, there must be a general election. It is a democratic necessity. The idea that the Tories can unite behind a Prime Minister now, any Prime Minister, let alone one that is in the public interest, I think is for the birds.
The Tories have shown that they're incapable of providing the leadership. They're not fit to govern our country. We don't need another Conservative Prime Minister. They need to go. We need another general election, and Conservative MPs have got to do their patriotic duty and vote for that.
How did all of this happen? The era of Liz Truss is far too short to even deserve that word. This was her arriving as Prime Minister last month.
Chancellor. Thank you.
In short, nearly her entire programme for government imploded on contact with reality.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the beginning of a new era, and as we contemplate, that's right, a new era.
Mini-budget maxi disaster, as her colleagues called this privately. The markets tanked, so did her poll ratings, and her MPs lost faith almost instantly. The other night I asked her, will you lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look, yeah.
And even yesterday she said,
I am a fighter and not a quitter.
Now it turns out she's done with fighting and she's quit.
I want to thank my rival friend.
So who will take over? You might just remember this guy.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Hasta la vista. See you later. Might we again? Some Conservatives would love it, others hate it. Last time's runner-up Rishi Sunak is another possibility, as are Cabinet Ministers Penny Mordaunt and Kemi Badenoch. And the woman who resigned as Home Secretary yesterday, having a pop at Liz Truss in the process, Suella Braverman.
You looking forward to number 10, Jeremy Hunt?
The answer is no. The new Chancellor has ruled himself out. At tea time, we found out more from the Conservative Party about how the contest will work.
Nominations are now open. Will close at 2 o'clock on Monday. Candidates will be expected to have at least 100 colleagues nominating them.
that if the party should decide to put forward 2 candidates, there will be an expedited, binding online vote of Conservative Party members to choose its next leader. All stages of the leadership election will be concluded by no later than Friday the 28th of October.
Who might find themselves moving in here a week tomorrow? After what's happened to Liz Truss, you might imagine it could give some second thoughts. Poisoned chalice it might be, but prized it still is. And tonight, the race is underway. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
We'll catch up again with Chris in just a moment. Before then, probably useful just to set out the timetable for the week ahead as we follow the process of electing a new Conservative leader and then Prime Minister. Nominations have opened today and it is up to Conservative MPs to nominate their choice of leader. They have then until 2 o'clock on Monday to get those nomination papers in. Now, the bar has been set deliberately high. Look at this. Candidate needs 100 nominations from fellow MPs. Some will find that very difficult. The initial result will come at 6 p.m. on Monday, so we could, theoretically, have a new Prime Minister by then. If another round is needed, it'll be held, we think, on Monday night with the result at around 9 p.m. And if, let's face it, it's by no means certain, there are 2 candidates left, well, the party membership will then get an online vote. And the result of that party membership vote would be announced on Friday, that's to say a week tomorrow. But it's clear already that some senior Conservatives want the outcome to be settled by MPs without involving the party membership, who, let's not forget, selected Liz Truss last time. Now, as for the potential winner, well, as Chris was telling us just a few seconds ago, these are the names doing the rounds. Boris Johnson, who, let's just remind ourselves, was actually thrown out by his own MPs just a matter of weeks ago. Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor who lost to Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the Commons, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary who resigned suddenly yesterday, Kemi Badenoch, who's the International Trade Secretary, and then at the end, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. Doesn't mean that others won't be involved, but those are the names being mentioned. Let's go back to Chris once again. Lots of talk of unity candidates, Chris. Somebody who can unite the party and, by implication, unite lots of people in the country. Now, when we look at that list of people, and especially Boris Johnson, what do we make of that aim?
The idea of a unity candidate, good luck with that for the Conservative Party, because as you may just have noticed over the last few weeks, there is a smidgen of disunity within that party. And any winner likes to describe themselves as a unity candidate, but the proof comes in how they govern. The 2 most important words, Hugh, that hang over the contest to come this evening are Boris and Johnson, because he is a giant of Conservative politics, still very well liked amongst the grassroots and well liked amongst some Conservative MPs. Jacob Rees-Mogg, incidentally, the Business Secretary, encouraging Tory MPs to back Mr Johnson. But there are some Conservatives who would be horrified at the prospect of him becoming Prime Minister less than 2 months after he stood down as Prime Minister, to such an extent that some are suggesting that they might defect to another party, they might resign, they might trigger a by-election. Boris Johnson is many things. A unity candidate he would not be, but he is a big name. He will be the person to beat were he to run. Then there are the other candidates, not least Rishi Sunak, the defeated candidate from last time. I don't think we should necessarily expect him to be saying anything publicly imminently in the next day or so. There's Penny Mordaunt. She was in the running last time, didn't make the last 2, but was very competitive amongst MPs. Perhaps we will hear from her in the next 24 hours. And then a weekend of cajoling and arm twisting. As you say, that bar is very high, reaching 100 nominations to get on the ballot. And then the extraordinary thought that a week tomorrow at the latest, we'll have a new Prime Minister here.
Beyond the talk about the timetable and the mechanics, Chris, there is another big issue, which is, for Labour and others, to do with democratic validity. The fact that the Prime Minister will be changing again without voters being involved. Now, to what extent is that likely to be an issue that enters this debate?
It's a massive question, this, and it's a question of legitimacy in a democracy as the Conservative Party cooks up via its internal processes another Prime Minister without any consultation with the electorate. Now, in strict parliamentary constitutional terms, that is appropriate and it is fine, because a Prime Minister is a Prime Minister because they can command a majority in the House of Commons, which usually means they are the leader of the biggest party. It's the very reason why Liz Truss is standing down, because she could no longer command that majority because she lost the faith of her own backbenchers. So a new Prime Minister, providing they can do that, is constitutionally allowed to carry on in office until the next general election, which could be as late as January 2025. But politically, it'll be very tricky. Now, were it to be Boris Johnson, he could say, well, look, I won the last election as Conservative leader, so I have a mandate. If it's any of the other candidates, it'll be a harder argument for them to make. Were it to be Mr Johnson, incidentally, he'll have the hard act of convincing his party and the wider country that he should be coming back so soon after being booted out.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason with the latest analysis there in Downing Street. Well, the past few weeks have seen, as we know, a collapse in the Prime Minister's personal ratings in a range of opinion polls, and in a trend that has spread alarm and panic among Conservative MPs, the party's poll ratings have tumbled as well. Now, our North of England correspondent Danny Savage was in the Yorkshire town of Wetherby at lunchtime today, just as the news of Liz Truss's resignation came through.
By the Conservative Party.
Lunchtime in the Black Bull in Wetherby. This was quite the conversation stopper.
That I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
No surprise, but what now? And what are the consequences of this?
I feel quite ashamed, really, to be honest. When we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? We were saying that anybody from outside England would be very disappointed and, laughing at us.
We've got to give the country confidence back, because there certainly is a lack of confidence here. Otherwise people that would normally vote Conservative, like myself, will think very differently if they don't get it sorted.
As the latest Tory bubble burst, people in this Conservative constituency are frustrated and fed up. Wanted some stability, please.
The Tories stab everybody in the back. There's no leadership. They stab Boris. I liked him as a character. Yes, he made mistakes, but he had a majority and was voted for. We are a great country. We have been a great country. We are a great country, and we still will be if we could just rally behind some decent leadership.
Liz Truss's time as Prime Minister will be remembered by many for rocketing interest rates and mortgage deals being pulled after that mini-budget. You sense the housing market won't miss her.
If you could sit down with senior Tory politicians now around your desk in Wetherby, what would you say to them?
Sort yourself out, for goodness sake. Yeah. Let's have some confidence in what you do, and let's have a policy that's going to be acceptable, not just to the country, but to the rest of the world.
In local cafes, politics was the talk of the town.
I did say to Marianne earlier on, shall we have Boris back? No. But, I think that...
Some people think that's the answer.
Well, I think he's got some vision of things that could go right. I do.
Back in the pub, they were debating about what happens next.
It just needs stabilising, needs sorting out and moving forward, because the rest of the country is in turmoil, isn't it?
The electorate and the world wants answers fast, along with a large slice of certainty and stability. Danny Savage, BBC News, Wetherby.
So as we've established, the shortest-serving Prime Minister, whose premiership unravelled with speed, has been announcing her resignation today. Appointed on the 6th of September, she chose Kwasi Kwarteng as her Chancellor. And then less than 3 weeks later, he unveiled that now infamous mini-budget, which alarmed the financial markets with a huge package of unfunded tax cuts. And days later, well, the Bank of England made that emergency intervention, buying government bonds to try to stabilise things. Just 38 days into the job and Mr Kwarteng was out. He was sacked, replaced by Jeremy Hunt, who then went on to scrap most of Mr Kwarteng's plans. Yesterday, Suella Braverman resigned as Home Secretary, replaced then by Grant Shapps. And there was chaos in the Commons last night, as we reported, over that key vote on fracking. And now it's the Prime Minister's exit we're talking about, a rapid demise, as our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, reports.
Liz Truss blamed global events for her troubles, but this record-breaking, humiliating downfall was almost entirely self-inflicted. From the start, she didn't enjoy the overwhelming support of colleagues. Just 50 Conservative MPs had her as their top choice in the first round of the ballot. Some experienced political commentators always had their doubts too.
Everyone who's ever worked with Liz Truss will tell you that she doesn't take advice and she wants to hear from people that she's right, and that you get frozen out if you start telling her that she's wrong. It's a way to make your way so far and so fast in business or politics, but there comes a point when that tin-earedness to contrary advice brings you down.
But Tory party members had been impressed over the summer as she set out her radical tax-cutting agenda.
But what I'm about as a Conservative is people keeping more of their own money, growing the economy so we avoid a recession.
Her rival, the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, predicted that approach would have serious consequences.
Your own economic advisor has said that your plans would mean that interest rates would have to go up to around 7%. So just think what that means for all of your mortgages.
His warnings were ignored and Liz Truss entered Downing Street as the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in just over 6 years. Her programme for government was put on hold when just 2 days after being appointed, Queen Elizabeth died and the country entered a period of mourning. When political life resumed, the Prime Minister and her Chancellor surprised everyone, including the rest of the Cabinet, with their plans to cut the top rate of income tax for the wealthiest. Despite the turmoil, Ms Truss refused to back down.
Are you absolutely committed to abolishing the 45p tax rate for the wealthiest people in the country?
Yes. And it is part, Laura, it is part of an overall package of making our tax system simpler.
Many Tory MPs who'd gathered for their party conference were furious, especially as rumours were circulating that benefits wouldn't rise in line with inflation. A U-turn was announced the following day. Within 2 weeks, Liz Truss had sacked her Chancellor and was forced to sit stony-faced as his replacement ripped apart almost all of her economic plan. It wasn't just policy problems. Liz Truss's poor communication skills were also an issue. She struggled to make her case in a difficult round of BBC local radio interviews.
The pound has dropped to a record low. The IMF has said that you should reevaluate your policies. Where have you been?
We had to take urgent action.
We're going to spend more in mortgage fees under what you've done based on the predictions than we would have saved with energy.
I don't think anybody is arguing that we shouldn't have acted on energy.
And after sacking Kwasi Kwarteng, she held a press conference that lasted less than 8 minutes and only took 4 questions.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Prime Minister, are you going to say sorry?
In the Commons earlier this week, it felt as if her authority was draining away.
All we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away.
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady. I can assure the House.
Plenty of Conservative MPs are glad Liz Truss has gone, but there is some sympathy.
For Liz personally, this must have been a really difficult decision. I didn't back her in the leadership. It must be really tough for her. And my thoughts, really with her and her family after what must have been a really bruising time.
Friends say Liz Truss wasn't given a chance to prove herself, and some wonder whether anyone can now lead such a fractured party. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the financial markets, which made life so difficult for Liz Truss and the government after that mini-budget, responded today to the news of her resignation, among other things, with the pound rising against the dollar. Our business editor Simon Jack has more details.
Shall we afford these tax cuts, Chancellor?
The road to Liz Truss's demise arguably started here.
A not-so-mini budget that she and her Chancellor announced with great fanfare.
And I commend it to the House.
Trussonomics, massive tax cuts, lighter regulation equals higher growth. But there was a problem. There was no explanation of how £45 billion in tax cuts would be paid for, and no analysis from the budget watchdog as to whether the sums added up. But the Chancellor was defiant and promised more giveaways over that weekend.
There's more to come. We've only been here 19 days. I want to see over the next year people retain more of their income.
The financial markets didn't like it one bit. They thought it showed a reckless approach to the public finances. The pound, already weak, fell to its lowest level in history against the dollar. The cost of government borrowing rose so quickly the Bank of England had to get involved, and that pushed up other borrowing costs. Mortgage rates, which were already rising, spiked even higher, with the cost of an average two-year deal now over 6.5%. The markets gave a massive thumbs down to Trussonomics.
So the plan was stripped of almost every major measure. An £18 billion cut in corporation tax, a 1p cut in income tax, energy subsidies for all for 2 years, all binned by replacement Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. The financial markets were reassured, a measure of calm was restored. And even today, as the Prime Minister herself is toppled, the markets have barely moved. How come?
So Jeremy Hunt is considered a safe pair of hands by financial markets. He has put in place the policies of Rishi Sunak, and they liked Rishi Sunak. They gave him a lot of credence in the markets. I think what the markets could potentially be afraid of down the line is who is going to be our next Prime Minister.
But businesses like this drinks firm in Sunderland have found the political and price instability hard to manage.
For us, clarity and certainty are the things that I think every business is struggling with. It's certainly what we're struggling with. We've been through a cycle where we were getting a cost increase on raw materials every month, and that needs to settle.
Very few businesses feel in a position to help grow the economy, which was and is the government's goal.
So confidence has slumped. There's no recruitment, there's no investment, there's no exporting. All these are down. So you need some political stability for people to make decisions to employ someone, to invest or to expand their business. That is not happening at the moment, and politics needs to catch up.
In 11 days, the government is due to publish a revised and independently scrutinised economic plan. Until then, a cloud hangs over the markets and the wider economy. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Let's talk a little more with our economics editor, Faisal Islam. Would it be too much to say that the markets are pretty happy that Liz Truss is going?
Well, there was a gentle bounce in the sterling when the resignation was announced, and also borrowing costs came down more. But actually, since some more uncertainty about who might replace Liz Truss has been out there from politics from Westminster, you've seen those things kind of go back, and they're pretty much where they were this morning. And the issue is that the calm we've seen in the markets, that certainly hasn't been there since sort of Monday, since this reverse budget from Jeremy Hunt, the calm we've seen is predicated really on the decisions that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has made, and the idea that he has put in place a series of policies, half of which we know about, half of which we don't know about, which will solve this problem and close the gap at this Halloween debt plan. Now, to the extent that there's now a competition to become Conservative leader, it's difficult to imagine that some of these issues won't become part of that competition, and there is the potential for spooking the markets again as we wait for this debt plan. And we're not sure, we think it's going to go ahead. The Treasury's working on it for a week on Monday, but it will ultimately be up to the next Prime Minister. There is a debate out there, Faisal, as you know better than most, about this period of office for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng before the reversal, that what we've seen is a kind of failed experiment, as some would see it, in a certain brand of right-wing economics. Is that how you see it? Yes, well, it was typified by this booklet that they wrote, Britannia Unchained. Now, it certainly was an experiment, and it certainly didn't work, I think it's fair to say. But I think they could have got a lot of these policies through in retrospect. Had they been a bit calmer, a bit slower, had they acknowledged, as they did, that global conditions were rough, that's probably a reason to be a bit more cautious and a bit more radical. But I think the big thing here, and where there might be lasting damage, is that Britain is a country that is dependent on the kindness of strangers. We have what's known as twin deficits, both in terms of our borrowing and in terms of our trading position. And the world has been willing to forget that because we've had very strong institutions. those institutions have been damaged over the past 44 days, and the world is now noticing some of these other imbalances. And that's the danger as we look over the next week. Exactly where is this going? Britannia not unchained, perhaps restrained now by in terms of policy choices.
Faisal, many thanks again. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor, with his thoughts on the trends that we've been seeing. Well, the turmoil at Westminster has been happening against the backdrop of bad economic news and further evidence of the cost of living crisis that's affecting millions of households and businesses. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has been discussing the impact of higher food bills and higher energy bills with people in Higher Broughton in Salford, one of the 20 most deprived local authorities in England.
Away from Westminster chaos, a place of hope when times are tough.
How many people come here?
I can get up to 40 people a day.
40 a day?
Yeah.
St James's is salvation for those who are cold, hungry, struggling with life today.
Yeah. How old is she?
She's 78, just turned, yeah. So she has Parkinson's at the moment and has asthma, and it's getting tough, yeah.
Liz Truss is going, but for Sonia, her mum's carer, difficult days continue.
When you listen to what's going on in Westminster, what does it mean to you in your life?
Well, I think it's awful, really. It's disgusting because they're just fighting amongst each other. Nothing's changed, and they're just showing that they can't lead the country. But the damage is done, whatever they've done, and whatever party gets in, the damage is done.
Go and get me some of them seeds out of there, please.
Jordana is mum to 11-year-old Logan. A single parent, she knows this place can be a lifeline.
Have you ever known life like this in Salford?
Never, ever, never. And it's getting harder and harder.
45 days, Liz Truss. What's she done for your life?
Nothing. Nothing at all. What's she done? I would really like the government to come into one of these and live the day as a life as a normal person. To have to decide whether they want to buy food or they want to go and get something necessity, whether it be a shoe, coats, washing powder.
It's cold, isn't it?
It is, it's freezing.
Next door, Reverend Michaela just wants the basics.
Not only create a warm welcome, but a warm space, hot meals, hot room.
She's been here for 15 months and says life is getting worse.
When you got the text or the BBC News alert saying Liz Truss was going,
yeah,
what did you think?
I think it just stirs up more uncertainty. And I think that's what we've seen over the past 45 days, is just uncertainty after uncertainty. And
are you worried for the people here?
Yeah, we can feed people, but people are really struggling with low mental health, anxiety, and the way people are talking about paying their bills, keeping their homes warm.
So you want politics to have the long-term answers?
Yeah, and it should.
Not far from St James's, we find Kumar.
Hey Kumar, you all right?
For this part of Salford to thrive, business owners like him need to do well.
They've gone up 3 times.
3 times?
So
this year?
But right now, politics isn't helping.
If the customers are struggling, we're going to struggle a little bit as well. Well, sometimes you want to pack it up, that's it, enough is enough.
When you were watching Liz Truss in government, what was going through your mind?
I'm thinking these lot of nutters, absolutely crazy.
Really?
They didn't know what they were doing.
So what next? At a time of hardship for many, who will rebuild faith in British politics? Ed Thomas, BBC News, Salford.
Well, in Scotland and Wales, the First Ministers have repeatedly complained that Liz Truss showed a complete disregard for the concerns of the devolved nations and the work of the Scottish and Welsh governments. In Northern Ireland, there's been disappointing progress, really, on resolving the political stalemate there, though there is the prospect of elections to come. In a moment, we'll hear from Chris Page in Belfast and Howell Griffith in Cardiff. But first, here's our Scotland editor, James Cook, in Edinburgh.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says that Liz Truss will now be a footnote in the realms of political history. During the entire brief Truss premiership, there was no formal discussion, either by telephone call or in person, between the two women. As to what should happen now, well, Nicola Sturgeon says a general election is a democratic necessity, echoing that call from the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. If there isn't one, Ms Sturgeon says that it would be a ludicrous, a ridiculous idea if Boris Johnson were to be a candidate to return as Prime Minister. And just taking a step back for a minute, this has a potential impact on the debate about Scotland's future. In 2014, the argument advanced by supporters of the Union was that it would bring stability, it would bring prosperity. Nicola Sturgeon says, well, just look around, the opposite is happening. And although there are obviously difficult questions to answer about independence, she says what's happened has made her case for her.
It's been said in the last few days that Westminster had ceased to have a functioning government. Well, Northern Ireland has been without a fully functioning devolved government since February. That was when the Democratic Unionist Party in effect withdrew from the power-sharing institutions here at Stormont. The DUP says it'll continue to block the formation of a Stormont executive until the Brexit trade border with the rest of the UK is scrapped. There's no sign of that happening anytime soon. Next Friday, the 28th of October, is the latest potential endpoint for the Tory leadership contest. It's also the legal deadline for a devolved government to be formed here. As things stand, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, is set on that day to call a new election to the devolved assembly, probably to take place on the 15th of December, about 7 months after voters last went to the polls. Even after today's events, the Stormont parties think it's still more likely than not that that fresh Assembly election will be called at the end of next week. The only certainty, though, is that there's a lot more uncertainty.
The response of most politicians in Wales has been scathing. The First Minister Labour's Mark Drakeford condemning what he called the complete and utter failure of the UK government and condemning us, he said, to all having to pay the cost. It's worth noting that in 44 days as Prime Minister, Liz Truss didn't even pick up the phone to the First Minister. Normally that call would happen on the first day, but in 6 weeks, well, she never found the time. So who do people here want to be her successor? Well, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives not committing at the moment. He was welcoming Liz Truss only 6 weeks ago. He was an even bigger fan of Boris Johnson. Not surprising maybe when you remember that Mr Johnson helped to secure a record victory in the 2019 general election and a record number of seats. Whoever is the next Prime Minister, though, will have a huge mountain and several valleys to climb if they're not going to lose all 14 Welsh Tory seats in the next general election.
Howell Griffith there in Cardiff, ending that sequence in Edinburgh and Belfast around the nations of the UK. Now, around the world, leaders have been giving their reaction to news of Liz Truss's resignation. In the US, President Biden thanked her for her partnership on the war in Ukraine and said the US and UK would continue to cooperate closely. In France, President Macron said it was important for Britain to find stability, as he put it, as soon as possible. Our diplomatic correspondent Caroline Hawley has more detail on the global reaction.
We're following some breaking news out of the United Kingdom after less than 2 months on the job.
Her resignation made headlines around the world, capturing the international bewilderment at the chaos in the UK. This from Italy, no stranger itself to short governments. And a German journalist found herself having to repeat the expletives used by one MP last night.
I'm furious and I don't care anymore. Ich übersetze das jetzt mal nicht, aber das ist eine Partei, wo wirklich...
In Brussels, EU leaders holding a summit to discuss the world's energy crisis were for a time sidetracked by the extraordinary political drama here.
I won't get involved in the political life of the UK. I hope in any case the UK can again find stability. That's good for us and good for Europe.
Stability is very important, and we would like to see the UK system within its capacity to be in a position to have a successor selected as quickly as possible, and that stability will be brought to the situation given the fairly significant geopolitical issues facing Europe.
At the weekend, Joe Biden took the unusual step of making clear he was no fan of Liz Truss's economic plans.
I disagree with the policy, but that's up to Great Britain to make that judgment, not me.
Today, he had warmer words for her.
But look, she was a good partner on Russia and Ukraine, and the British are going to solve their problem, but she was a good partner.
But diplomats who spent their careers trying to build up Britain abroad, such as this former ambassador to the US, are looking on at the political turmoil of the past few weeks with horror.
A reputation built up over decades seems to me to have been sacrificed, to have been ruined almost overnight. It's a really sad moment to see this happening. I would never have expected it, and it feels almost surreal to see events unfold in this way. I just hope that we can get some stable and competent and effective government back and rebuild our reputation, but it's going to take quite a long time.
Today, predictably, Russian television mocked Liz Truss. The Foreign Ministry said Britain had never known such a disgrace as Prime Minister. But the UK's allies are fervently hoping now for a period of political calm, with the myriad problems facing the world, not least the threat that Russia poses. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Well, for more context and analysis, Ros Atkins on the week. A new show on BBC One gets underway tonight, and you can watch his take on the Prime Minister's resignation later, and then on the BBC iPlayer. Let's turn then to some of the day's other main news. People who work with children and don't report allegations of child sexual abuse should be prosecuted, according to the long-awaited findings of an independent inquiry. It's among a set of wide-ranging changes recommended following that 7-year inquiry which described child sexual abuse in England and Wales as horrific and deeply disturbing. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has more details.
The testimony heard in this room has been devastating.
Of the 8 boys in my dormitory at St Leonard's, 6 are now dead from drug overdoses and suicides.
Devious perpetrators protected by institutions more worried about their reputations. Today, the final verdict of the panel which has heard it all.
The nature and scale of the abuse we encountered was shocking and deeply disturbing. This is not just a historical aberration which happened decades ago. It is an ever-increasing problem.
So what's the recommendation? Well, this huge report says that anyone who works with children and fails to report direct evidence of child abuse, either witnessing it or being told about it by a child or a perpetrator, could be prosecuted and fined.
And what would that requirement mean in real life? These campaigners, supporting each other, survived abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses, a religious sect.
Were there moments when it could have been reported outside the Jehovah's Witnesses?
It was his word against mine. At no stage were the police contacted, and therefore, because he denied it and they couldn't take it any further, he was allowed to continue with the abuse to the point where years later he raped me.
If there'd been mandatory reporting at that time, that abuse would have stopped instead of carrying on for another 5.5 years.
Not just reporting, but also sanctions necessary so that if people don't obey that particular law, that some action can be taken against them.
But victims' lawyers question how many people would be prosecuted for not disclosing abuse.
Somebody would have to have been told by the child, by the perpetrator, or they would have had to have witnessed it themselves. How likely is that?
Very rare in my experience of the vast cases that I've dealt with over many, many years. And that is a problem with the proposed legislation. Yes, that bit's fine, but it doesn't deal with the vast majority of cases that I see, which is where a report is made of concern.
The government will now consider the recommendation. Today, Labour said it would change the law. Tom Simons, BBC News.
3 years after a teenage motorcyclist was killed in a road accident outside a military base in Northamptonshire, an American citizen has pleaded guilty to causing his death by careless driving. Anne Sakoulas, whose husband worked for the US diplomatic service in the UK, appeared at the Old Bailey by video link from Washington, D.C. The mother of Harry Dunn said today's events had brought justice for her son. Anne Sakoulas had left the UK shortly after the crash, claiming diplomatic immunity. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford has the story.
It's more than 3 years since Harry Dunn was killed in a head-on collision outside a US base in Northamptonshire. This afternoon, wearing the green of his favourite motorbike, his family arrived at the Old Bailey in London to see the American woman responsible finally admit her guilt in court. Appearing by video link from her lawyer's office in Washington, Anne Sakoulas, with her dark hair tied back, pleaded guilty to a charge of causing Harry Dunn's death by careless driving. Harry Dunn was just 19 years old when he died, and his family have campaigned hard to get the case to this stage, when once a court case seemed impossible.
It's been really tough, honestly. And today, honestly, it feels just like the sun's come out. I didn't know if we'd ever get to this stage sometimes, and thankfully for today, with the support of these guys and you guys, we've got there, and we've got justice for our son. Yeah. I really feel that.
Emotions were running high, but they were partly feelings of relief. Afterwards, his mum Charlotte told me that on the night he died, she'd promised Harry she would get justice for him.
Little did I know that it would take me this long to carry out that promise, but I was never going to give up. Never broken a promise to my kids, and if I'd have had to carry on for another few years, I damn well would.
And do you feel today that you've kept that promise?
Yeah, I do. That's what's making me so emotional, because it's been a really long 3 years.
On the day of the accident, Anne Sakoulas drove out of this US base. Unfamiliar with driving in Britain, she went onto the wrong side of the road, remaining there for more than 20 seconds until she hit Harry Dunn on a blind corner. The base where her husband worked is a highly secretive communications centre, and she flew out of the UK 19 days later, claiming diplomatic immunity. The judge has now directed that Anne Sakoulas should return to the UK to be sentenced next month, though there's no way of enforcing that. Daniel Sanford, BBC News.
Well, it's just turned 11:15 on this extended edition of BBC News at 10 on the day of the Prime Minister's resignation. And we'll return to that story now, because Liz Truss has resigned as Conservative leader after just 44 days in office as Prime Minister. Conservative Party members, around 160,000 of them, might be involved once again in choosing the next leader and the next Prime Minister. So what do Conservative voters make of the collapse of Liz Truss's premiership? Our Midlands correspondent, Navtej Johal, has been finding out.
Shopping for a new leader. In this traditionally safe Conservative seat, party members and voters have been watching recent events with consternation. Simon Robinson is the leader of Rushcliffe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire. How have you felt in recent weeks as a Conservative Party member and leader of a local council?
Disappointed, surprised. I've never seen anything like it. Things happen so quickly, and not just at Prime Minister level. Obviously, we've seen ministers resign as well. So it really has been quite chaotic. It's been very unique. It's been very challenging.
Who do you want to see take on the mantle of leader next?
Well, I think what's absolutely key is experience. So on that basis, I would probably go for Rishi Sunak. That he's been in government. He was Chancellor.
Well, Rushcliffe is a true blue Conservative constituency. The former Chancellor, Ken Clarke, was the local MP here for nearly 50 years. There's a Conservative club just around the corner. But the recent events appear to have damaged at least some of the support around here. You've been a Conservative Party voter?
I have in the past, yes. And I wouldn't vote Conservative now, no.
Why not?
Because I don't feel we can trust them. I feel the whole fiasco with Boris, and followed by the whole fiasco now with Liz Truss, I just don't feel I can support them anymore. I feel we need a change.
I think, like a lot of people, I'm put off by what's going on. They've not covered themselves in glory at all.
The Conservative Party, you're put off from voting for them at the next general election, whenever that might be?
I'm afraid so at the moment, yes.
As thoughts turn to the next Prime Minister, One familiar name kept returning among Tory voters.
Bring back Boris.
Is that what you'd like to see?
Well, he did a good job on Brexit. I think somebody over there agrees with me, so yes, bring back Boris.
Well, personally, I'd bring back Boris. That's my answer, really.
We hear that he may be throwing his hat into the ring. Why do you want to see Boris Johnson return?
I think he was an excellent leader. He made mistakes, he admitted to it, he apologised eventually. But I think he's a good all-round leader. He got us through COVID, he's got that presence that Liz hasn't got.
But not everybody was looking ahead. The pace of events means some haven't even had a chance to catch up on today's news.
She'll get over it. She'll survive.
You know she's resigned?
No, I didn't know that.
She resigned earlier this afternoon.
Oh, it surprises me.
Oh, really?
I'd have told her to stay.
Navtej Johal, BBC News, Rushcliffe.
Well then, let's have a final word tonight with our political editor, Chris Mason, in Downing Street. Well then, Chris, I suppose I'd say, what are the next few days likely to bring?
Well, Liz Truss, the history maker for all the wrong reasons, the most efficient humiliation in British political history. But power, and therefore intrigue and scrutiny, instantly switches to those who might aspire to move in there, potentially as soon as Monday, certainly on the current timetable, by, at the latest, a week tomorrow. Not for the first time in this postcode, one question hangs in the air. What will Boris Johnson do? And can he persuade a sufficient number of Conservative MPs to forgive him? Can he persuade the country to forgive him so soon, having been booted out of office just last month? Lots of others engaging in plenty of arm twisting and phone bashing tonight. The next few days are going to be absolutely crucial in determining who is our next Prime Minister, the third Prime Minister of this year.
Chris, many thanks. We'll talk again tomorrow, I've no doubt. Chris Mason there, our political editor in Downing Street. The time is just turned 10 to 11 and Louise is with me with the weather. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Hugh. We did quite literally see stormy skies, didn't we, today across Parliament. This is Westminster, as you can see. In fact, we had some thunder and lightning from around 6:30 this morning. Indication maybe of what was to come. Now, the thunderstorm has eased away and the rain has been pushing its way steadily north over the last few hours, but it is going to grind to a halt across eastern Scotland overnight tonight. I just want to draw your attention down into the southwest. The next batch of sharp showers set to arrive. They'll be a bit of a nuisance through the night tonight. They're going to be driving their way steadily northwards. That's worth bearing in mind. Elsewhere, we could see some mist and fog patches forming just that little bit further north where we've got those clearer skies. But it's this area of low pressure that's going to continue to drive those showers in. Eastern England might start the day relatively fine and dry with some sharper showers arriving through the latter stages of the afternoon, and they're going to be driven along by some pretty brisk winds, 50-mile-an-hour gusts down in the southwest. Now, if you do dodge the showers and you keep the sunshine, we've still got that warmth. It's incredible, really, for this time of year. Temperatures, once again, high teens. Now, as we move towards the weekend, more turbulent weather to come, I'm afraid. That's for Sunday primarily. This little bump of high pressure will keep things relatively quiet to start the day on Saturday. Lovely start for many, some sunshine coming through. Certainly the first half of the weekend is the best in terms of the story. A few scattered showers into Northern Ireland and into Western Scotland. Lighter winds around on Saturday as well. Some sharper showers starting to develop once again into the southwest. And again, these could be heavy and thundery. But in that sunshine, it will feel very pleasant indeed. Hope you can make the most of it, because look at Sunday. Showers or longer spells of rain, and once again, some of them heavy and thundery. Hugh.
Louise, thanks very much. And Louise there with the latest on the weather for us. That's it tonight from BBC News at 10. Here we are, plenty of extra analysis on BBC News Online. Interviews and analysis, of course, as usual, on the Today programme on Radio 4 tomorrow morning. And then that's starting at 6 a.m. Also starting at 6 a.m, our friends on BBC Breakfast with their own reports and analysis too. Here on BBC One now, in a moment, we are going to join our colleagues in the nations and regions. Before that, we're going to leave you with some of the words and images that mark the briefest premiership on record. Have a good night.
I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government. I'm honoured to take on this responsibility at a vital time for our country.
Promise, Your Majesty. Your Majesty.
With lower rates of corporation tax and lower rates of personal tax. We promised to prioritise growth, Mr. Speaker. We promised a new approach for a new era. We promised to release the enormous potential of this country.
I've put in place a new Chancellor with a new strategy to restore economic stability.
There will be more difficult decisions, I'm afraid.
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look. I am a fighter and not a quitter.
All we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away.
I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.